Good morning, and thanks for joining me for another episode of Beyond the Pink Cloud. This is your host, Dr. Alice Kirby. And with me today, I'm delighted that we have with us Dr. Neal Barnard. He is the president of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, founder to the Barnard Medical Center, and a fellow of the American College of Cardiology. He's also a published author with over, I believe, 19 books. And his most recent book is entitled Your Body in Balance, The New Science of Food, Hormones, and Health. Thanks for joining me today, Dr. Barnard.
Great to be with you today.
I appreciate you taking the time. And so we're right now in the middle of this COVID-19. And so I'd love to just hear your take on what's happening and what's going on over there in DC. Anything you'd like to share on the subject, I'm sure would be appreciated. And I'm just curious what your take on things is right now.
Our take on it is pretty much the same as everyone else's, which is this is a threat. It's a huge threat, and the encouraging part is that in China, it welled up around New Year's, just before New Year's, and seems to be, we think, maybe starting to scale down now. And if that's the case, that suggests that January, February, March, maybe something like a 3-month time frame might be what it is. However, it's hard to know if that's going to be the time frame elsewhere. We're seeing disasters now in Italy and Spain and France. Here in the US, we're behind simply because of geographic reasons. It's taking its time getting here, but it's certainly here. So our piece of this is the nutrition side. And that might be a little surprising, but I might say a couple things about that. The people who are at most risk are, as you know, people over 60, but also people with cardiovascular disease or respiratory disease. And for some reason, at particular risk are people with hypertension or people with diabetes. And the question is, why would that be? And a surprising answer comes from, maybe not so surprising, is the fact that hypertension can damage the blood vessels and it can assault the heart and can lead to, and diabetes can do the same. But another piece of this is that the COVID-19 virus enters the body through certain enzymes that are on the surface of lung cells and heart cells. And it's called angiotensin converting enzymes, ACE. And that's a big issue for people who have hypertension because they go to the pharmacy and their pill is called an ACE inhibitor. And it causes this enzyme, a certain enzyme, to be expressed more. And a little spike on the surface of the virus attaches to this enzyme, and it's believed to enter the body that way. So that's led to a lot of speculation. We don't know if it's true, but people have said, okay, if I'm taking that drug, I'm going to be at more risk. And so scientists are debating it. There's really no clear evidence one way or the other. But what it comes down to really is this. We need to use the safest ways that we can to tackle up blood pressure and to tackle diabetes. You can't make your age go down, but you can make your blood pressure go down. You can make your diabetes go down a bit too. And we've been doing research on all of those for quite a number of years. And without going too far into this, vegetables and fruits have potassium in them that lowers your blood pressure. Cheese has sodium in it, which makes your blood pressure go up. So skip the cheese, eat the vegetables and fruits. Your diabetes gets under better control the more your diet is based on plants, vegetables and fruits and grains and beans. And the more it's meaty and fatty, the more your diabetes is going to be out of control. So we've written a lot on all of those things. So I would definitely plug in a plant-based diet. And it happens, luckily, to be rich in certain things that appear to be immune boosters in many research studies. I'm talking about the antioxidants, the beta carotene that makes a carrot orange, or the lycopene that makes a tomato red, or the anthocyanins that make grapes and blueberries their dark bluish color. Those are antioxidants, and we believe that if our diet is richer in those, that we'll do better. So those are all part of it. Maybe one last thing: don't stay up watching the news. Go to sleep.
100%. Or maybe just don't watch the news. Give yourself 5 to 10 minutes a day with it.
Yeah, and also go to sleep. Sleep is, if you don't sleep, you're dragged out not only emotionally, but also physically. And also when you're asleep, you can't reach for a donut. So it's a good idea my own rule is 10 o'clock. It doesn't matter how great the TV show is or how wonderful my book is or how many emails I'm expecting. Turn out the light, go to sleep. And there are some tricks that I use to help with sleep. But even if you wake up early, you'll find that you're on a better emotional keel. And here's the trick. If you are not tired out and ragged out and dragged out, you have a little more strength or a little more resilience. If you're tired, you'll do anything just to get through the day, whether that's eat bad food or smoke or drink or abuse your body. If you are tired, you're going to let those things happen to yourself. If you're a little bit better rested, you got just a little more strength against all the assaults of the day.
Absolutely. It gives you a bit more reserve in your emotional and your physiological tank as well. I think you're better equipped to handle things as they come. And I know your research has involved a lot with diabetes, and you've actually been able to reverse cases of diabetes, correct? I know you mentioned that in the talk where I saw you. That's something that your work has been able to do, I'd say, quite frequently. Is that appropriate to say? Accurate?
It's something that we thought was impossible when I was in medical school. We used to say, once you have diabetes, you'll always have diabetes. And then we started to see people. And Frank, I have to say that was a pretty good prognosis if people followed the advice that they were getting up at that time. But we started using more aggressive diets. 2003, the NIH funded us to test vegan diets, and not just vegan, but vegan, very low fat, healthy foods, vegetables and fruits and beans and grains. But it wasn't low carb at all. It had lots of natural healthy starches and natural fruit sugars and whatever. But we started to see diabetes going away, and that was mind blowing. But now I have to say that if a person does this diet, it's going to help them at any stage. But if they do it particularly early, fairly early after diagnosis, within the first year or two, their ability to get the disease to just go away is really quite high. If you've had diabetes for 20, 30 years, it may not go away. Very unlikely to go away, but you'll be able to almost certainly reduce your medication use, greatly reduce the risk of complications. So it's a good thing no matter what.
Absolutely. I know you've been working hard on publishing research and and books on this topic. Do you feel like this is becoming normalized at all within the biomedical system?
Oh, yes. Vegan diets are now an accepted modality for people with type 2 diabetes. Our research was, it's obviously peer reviewed, but it was funded by the National Institutes of Health, which is, it's the premier research institute in the universe. And when we got our first results, they were published by the American Diabetes Association in its journal called Diabetes Care, which is the one that all the endocrinologists read. It's out there, but I have to say there's a lot of noise out there too. So don't eat bread and all that kind of stuff. So it's always challenging to be able to get a really good approach forward, but you don't have to look very far to see, frankly, the world is going vegan. Many people are doing this, and I don't just mean the Joaquin Phoenixes of the world who are doing it at the Oscars, but or still athletes. Yes, they're doing it, but doctors are embracing this as well. So that's a good thing.
It's definitely a good thing. Are you vegan? I imagine that you are. Yeah.
I follow a vegan diet now. I have to say I was not raised that way.
I was going to ask how long you'd been practicing a vegan or a plant-based diet.
Yeah. Oh no, a long time now. But I grew up in North Dakota.
Okay.
And so my whole extended family raised cattle. And I hate to tell you this, but I had a shotgun, and I killed more than my share of animals as a child with my dad, and we did the foolish macho things that people do. I had a job at McDonald's, and I have personally driven cattle to slaughter, none of which I would do anymore. But anyway, it's never too late to change your own diet.
I think that's good advice. I work frequently with the geriatric population, many of whom have diabetes or are on these multiple medications, and trying to intersperse this conversation in of like, hey, can we make some small dietary changes? I asked a patient the other day when she was like, get me my milk. And I was like, oh, do you use the hormone-free milk? And she's like, it's just milk. And I think it was 2 days after I'd seen your talk. So I was really hyped up on the dairy industry. And But with some people, I think it is, you have to use this very titrated approach of, can we make a small change? Really, no matter what the age, I think, because it's always going to be beneficial of, can we just intersperse more leafy green vegetables into your diet? Can we start here?
Yeah, I think that's great. And any change that a person makes is super. We do have a method that we've used here to try to accelerate it, which it's 2 steps. And first of all, this is predicated on a person wanting to.
Sure.
So
It's
let's
the most
say a
important
person,
thing, I think.
and the people who want to, that we see, are people who are sick of being overweight. They say, I just don't feel right. And I have done, they will say, I've done Atkins, I did South Beach, I did Jenny Craig, I did Nutrisystem, I did keto, I did paleo, I did all these things, and it's not working for me, I'm sick of it. Or a person who has diabetes and is really worried because they've seen what's happened to their family members who had diabetes, their visual loss, or somebody had an amputation, and I mean, these are motivated people. Or a young woman who has a diagnosis of breast cancer, and she thinks, well, what if my disease comes back? I was treated, but this could come back. Or, I mean, there are many, many examples of this. Or, as maybe hopefully we'll talk about today, women with menstrual cramps or endometriosis or hormone-related issues. They are strongly motivated to make a diet change. So anyway, here's what we do. We break it into 2 steps. And the whole process takes only 4 weeks. The first week, that's the first step, is you take 7 days to identify foods that you would like. That's the whole deal. You don't throw out anything else, but you think, okay, for breakfast, I guess oatmeal is vegan, but I haven't made it since I was a kid. So now's your week to try it, and top it with cinnamon raisins, or I have corn flakes with milk every morning. Is almond milk any good? I don't know. You got a week, try it. Every night I have dinner at an Italian place, and they give me my spaghetti with a meat sauce. Is the tomato sauce any good? If they top it with artichoke hearts and grilled mushrooms, would that be nice? I don't know. Try it. Or I meet my friends at the sushi bar. If I have the vegan sushi, like the cucumber roll or the asparagus roll or the sweet potato roll, will I like it? You got a week, try it. So for the first week, you're trying out foods, and the goal is to identify breakfasts and lunches and dinners that have no animal products that you would actually like. And you make a list. And everybody, people don't need 7 days to do it. They do it faster than that. But you give them 7 days. And then the next step is 3 weeks. And during that 3-week period, you eat those foods. And everyone says, well, that's easy. So you're going vegan now. You're throwing out the animal products. But you've already identified the foods that you're going to eat. And you do it strictly for 3 weeks. You don't eat any cheese or meat during that time. And at the end of those 3 weeks, people will say 2 things. First of all, I feel so much better. I lost weight. This is the easiest weight loss. I'm not starving. I'm never hungry like I was on, a calorie counting diet, but I'm losing weight. And if they got diabetes, their blood sugar is better, their energy is better. But the other thing they say is, aside from the physical changes, I just look at food differently. I thought I was going to really miss chicken, and I don't. And I've also discovered there's all these other cool things out there that I didn't know were out there. And they'll say, I found a website, and I found a new product at the store, and I found about 6 friends who are doing the same darn thing, wondering where I was all this time. So anyway, the physical changes and kind of the psychological changes kick in. So that's our 2-step method. And I've never seen anybody unable to do it. And the beauty of doing it fast is that they get results. If they go too slow, they may not get enough results that make them really convinced it's good. Once your weight is coming down, you think, yay, I'm gonna stick with this.
It's very motivating. I love
it is.
I love the trial and error period. I feel like so many things in life are like that. I like to think about things as experiments. That's how I work with a lot of my clients and patients, is let's try this and see what results we get. And let's see, again, kind of in a quick time period, because if it's not helping, then we'll know soon, but it's worth just trying. I think that's easier for people to grasp as well, that mindset.
One nice thing about the 3-week period is, since you're not having animal products at all, that allows you to forget a little bit. And what I mean is, let's say if a person was ever a smoker, they'll know what I'm talking about. If you got through 21 days without a cigarette, you got some power going for you now. Or if alcohol was your issue, if you got through 21 days, you're feeling like, okay, I'm in a pretty good spot right now. However, if you had had a drink or a cigarette or whatever it is you're trying to get away from, if you had it every couple of days, you're not feeling any power now because it's still on your shoulder. It's still calling your name pretty aggressively. Once you get that distance, it's good. So cheese is on your shoulder too. And if you had it yesterday, it's going to be calling your name today. But once you've gotten away from it for about 21 days, you feel differently. So that's why we're strict about it. It allows the brain to forget that failed relationship that you might have had with food, where you love the food and it just didn't love you back.
That's a great plan. It sounds like it works really well. And I'm glad you brought up the topic of hormones and working with women around hormones, because I'd love to hear you speak more about that as well. Recently, I've been reading, I don't know if you're familiar with Elisa Vitti's work. She just published a book called In the Flow, and it's about cycle syncing and women's hormones and what happens at the 4 different phases of a woman during menstrual age cycling and what kind of foods we can use to support it. And she doesn't advocate just for a vegan diet. She does advocate for a lot of, healthy plant-based organic foods and sustainable meat products. But I'd love to hear your take on what your research has shown on using different foods during different parts of the cycle, even to best support a woman's natural infradian rhythm and cycle.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. And there are many different approaches. We're all kind of like the blind men and the elephant, where we're all finding our different pieces. But my piece came on the phone. I was sitting here at my desk and a young woman called me up with terrible menstrual pain. And many women have some pain, but for maybe roughly, I'm going to say maybe 1 in 10, it's just off the scale. I'm not going to go to a business meeting today kind of pain. And that was her situation. And so she needed painkillers. And so I said, well, I can give you some heavy duty painkillers for a couple of days. But I started thinking, what are we going to do to stop this from happening next month? And so I actually used our diabetes diet for her. Now, this is going to sound hard to understand at first. It's no animal products at all. It's a completely vegan diet. And we keep oils really low, all oils, even olive oil and whatever. We keep them to a bare minimum. And she tried it. She said, okay, I'll do this. She called me 4 weeks later and said, this is amazing. Her period had arrived with no symptoms at all. And so I then did a randomized clinical trial where we brought in a large group of women, and we were working with Georgetown University's Department of OBGYN. And it works. Not only did we find that the diet reduces pain, but it also reduced the kind of the prodrome of that. The premenstrual symptoms of bloatedness, moodiness, water retention, that kind of thing. So bloating, water retention, moodiness, all those things seem to get better. So the question is why? Well, actually, let me tell you one other thing, if you don't mind.
No, please do.
In the course of this study, we were tracking what dietary changes could do for what's obviously a hormonal issue. And so we asked all the participants not to use any hormones in the study. So, for example, if they were sexually active, we asked them to use something other than the pill, because the hormone that they would take in the pills would confuse our results. And one of the women in the study wasn't using any contraception because she and her husband had been evaluated years earlier for why they couldn't get pregnant. And she said, it's not him, it's me, I don't ovulate. The second month that she was in the research study, she came into our center and she said, Dr. Barnard, I've got some bad news and I've got some good news. And the bad news is I am leaving your study. And the good news is I am pregnant. And she couldn't believe that she had become pregnant like that. And so she gave birth to a healthy baby. And a little while later, she gave birth to a second baby and to a third baby. And here's my point. The first woman, the one who called me on the phone, had a diagnosis of dysmenorrhea, menstrual pain. The second one had a diagnosis of infertility. I would like to take my number 2 lead pencil and turn it around and just erase those diagnoses and say, wait a minute, what if it's just a question of being out of balance with hormones? And at the risk of being overly verbal with all of this stuff, let me just describe why the pain went away. Every month in a woman's cycle, the uterus is the most optimistic organ in the body. Every single month, it's convinced this is going to be the big one. So your body makes extra estrogen, the female sex hormone, of which there are a few different varieties. There's estradiol and some others. And that comes out of the ovaries, it goes through the bloodstream, and it arrives at the inner lining of that uterus. And it thickens it up to make kind of a thick cushion where hopefully there will be an implantation of an embryo. Or that's the idea. And here's the key. If a woman has too much estrogen in her blood for some reason, that endometrial layer thickens up too much. Mm-hmm. At the end of the month, the disappointed uterus discovers we're not pregnant after all. So it sends that whole thick lining away in menstrual flow. If she had too much estrogen, that overly thickened lining leads to heavier flow, more prolonged flow, more clotting, and more cramps, because that thickened lining creates prostaglandins. Mm-hmm. Their job is to stop the bleeding, basically. But they cause the whole uterine line, the uterus cramps up. And some of the prostaglandins get in your bloodstream and make you feel rotten. And so up until now, doctors say, well, just take ibuprofen. Or let me put you on the pill, and da-da-da-da-da. What they're not thinking of is, wait a minute, somehow you got too much estrogen in your blood. And this is what was going through my mind. Mm-hmm. When the young woman called me up, I thought, why would she have extra estrogen? And so I have to confess, I made just an educated guess. Number one, cows are milked when they're pregnant. Every cow on every dairy is impregnated annually through a rather creepy procedure that I will not describe. A cow's gestation is 9 months. 9 months out of 12, they are pregnant. They are making more estrogen, more progesterone. It gets into the milk. And when the milk is turned into cheese, it's concentrated. And your average woman consumes about 35 pounds of cheese every year.
It's a lot of cheese.
Plus yogurt, plus milk, plus butter, plus ice cream, plus all the dairy that's baked into cookies and stuff. So she's getting traces of estrogens. Those estrogens add to your own. They are biologically active in your body. And you could say, well, it's not much. It's enough to actually affect your biochemistry. That's number one. Number two, your body has a way of getting rid of extra estrogens, and it requires fiber. And fiber is the roughage in vegetables and beans and fruits and whole grains. Your liver takes the estrogen out of the blood and sends it into the intestinal tract where fiber carries it away. But if you had salmon and chicken breast, they don't have any fiber. And so the estrogen is reabsorbed into your blood through a process called enterohepatic circulation. And as soon as you have a high fiber vegan diet, that stops. You get rid of the excess estrogen. And the third thing is, for reasons that I cannot understand, but it happens, fatty foods, even oils, raise estrogen levels a little bit. So for the women on the phone, I just made this guess. I thought, this isn't going to hurt you, but it might help you. Let's throw out all the dairy products. All that estrogen's gone. Throw out all the animal products. Now, everything you're eating is high in fiber. Keep oils low. Now, your whole diet is really low in fat, and it was her absolute cure. And she discovered later, if she would bring in, you could bring in any of those three. Mm-hmm. Animal products in general, dairy products in particular, greasy stuff, and your cramps are going to come back. So anyway, forgive me for that long-winded answer, but that's...
No, I loved it. And I have a few follow-up questions, because I know the talk where I saw you spoke a lot about the dairy industry as well. And I was curious about if people are using things like sheep dairy or goat dairy or, organic dairy from free-range cows, if that makes a difference at all in the estrogen levels?
No, it really doesn't.
Okay.
Because the idea is, it's an animal who... Let me just say a word about this, if you don't mind. I'm a doctor, but I want to talk about the industry, and I can perhaps be qualified for doing that because my whole family made plenty of money off abusing animals for years. What the farmer does, you can go out to rural Maryland and find a goat farm where the goats are hopping around. They may even have goat, yoga on the side, and everyone looks all happy and healthy. What they're not going to show you is how they impregnate the animals. And this is true for everything. On a dairy farm where the cows are, the underpaid farm worker takes his left hand and puts a glove all the way up to his shoulder, and he sticks it up the cow's rectum, up to his elbow, and through the rectal wall, you can feel the uterus and you can grab it. And that's what they do. And then you take your right hand and you jam through the cervix what looks like a big long knitting needle, and you insert semen that you took from a bull. And these animals aren't volunteers, but they're not going to fight because, I mean, she's chained up, and she didn't ask to get impregnated, but she did. And then 9 months later, she's going to give birth to a calf, and the calf is going to be taken away from her because we want the milk. And if the calf is male, the calf will be killed for veal. The female will be isolated from mom, and she's not going to like that at all, and her mother's not going to like it. But a few years later, she'll have her opportunity to get impregnated too. And this goes over and over again every year till about she's about 4. At about age 4, they're all just killed for meat because their production is low. So anyway, I mention that because frankly, for a lot of people, it's so creepy.
It is creepy.
It motivates them to think maybe it's not this wonderful thing. And go to a goat farm where they say, you know, it's healthy, happy, organic goats. Ask them, what do they do with the kids? What do they do with the kids? And they'll say, have you seen our garden? And you say, no, what happens to the baby goats around here? And they'll say, why don't you buy a book in our gift shop? They don't want to talk to you about the fact that they kill them all. You know, they let them do goat yoga until they're big enough to hurt you, and then they're all dead. Anyway, but back to your question. Health-wise, what's the difference? Goat milk is worse. Sheep milk is worse. The reason they were popular is because they were deemed to be smaller operations that weren't so industrial, and because in some cases their saturated fat intake is even higher. So it was a more buttery kind of a flavor. And that was the idea. It wasn't a health reason. And they're pregnant too, so they're producing the same estrogens.
Interesting. I'm glad you clarified that. I'm curious too about high levels of estrogen in some soy-based products, and if that was factored into any of the studies you did or to this randomized controlled trial, if people were using high amounts of any kind of soy products, because I see that a lot with the vegan diet, and I wanted to ask your opinion on that as well, is people using products that are very processed and also that are high in soy, and how that has shown up in the research, or what your advice is for people that are following this diet.
Soy has been a really interesting issue. Back, I think it was 1931, the researchers discovered compounds in soy that are called isoflavones. And they have a chemical structure vaguely similar to estrogens. And in test tube studies, you can actually attach them to an estrogen receptor. And so that got people nervous. And the first question that they thought was for men, that maybe soy would cause men to either become effeminate or infertile, or to develop what is unfortunately on the internet referred to as man boobs. Not my word, but their word. And then the bigger question was, would women get breast cancer if they ate soy? Or if a woman had cancer already, if she consumed soy, would it cause the cancer to progress? So luckily, we've got a lot of data on all of those issues. Regarding man boobs, you can investigate this yourself by going to the beach in August. And if you see a heavyset guy who's just taken his shirt off and he has some breast augmentation, you might go up and ask him, how much tofu have you eaten this past week? And he will look at you like, what are you talking about? And you could ask him about edamame or miso or tempeh, and you will soon discover that neither he nor any of his friends eat any of those foods at all. And the reason that he got breast enhancement is because he's eating cheeseburgers and pizza and chicken wings and fattening foods, and body fat produces estrogens. Fat cells take testosterone and convert it into estrogens, and that goes to his breast area and is producing breast tissue. So soy has nothing to do with it. Regarding women and breast cancer, we have many studies on this now, and they're quite uniform, that women consuming the most soy, and when I say soy, I mean soy milk, tofu, tempeh, miso, whether they're fermented products like miso or tempeh, or unfermented like soy milk. In either case, the women consuming the most soy have about 30% less risk of breast cancer compared to women who avoid soy. So soy is a cancer preventive. And then for women who have been diagnosed with cancer in the past, breast cancer, if they consume the most soy, those groups consuming the most have also about roughly a 30% reduced risk of recurrence or mortality. And for men, it's about the same, roughly same 30% improvement for prostate cancer risk. And so you go back to the beginning, you say, well, wait a minute. soy isoflavones attached to estrogen receptors.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on here? How can it reduce cancer risk? And the answer is, by analogy, on the floor of your car, you've got a pedal. It's a gas pedal. You step on it and your car accelerates. But right next to it is another pedal, which is the brake. And if you step on that, your car stops. And you have in your body, you have alpha receptors, you have beta receptors. Soy has now been shown to be the brake. So we've done well, I wouldn't say we've done a 180 because frankly, most scientists never believed that soy caused cancer anyway, but there's a lot of urban mythology about it. It's now quite clear that the women who avoid soy because their ill-informed oncologist told them that they shouldn't have soy, those women are condemned to about a 30% higher mortality. So you don't have to have soy, it's totally optional, but it does not cause these problems. And if anything, it's actually quite beneficial and a whole lot more beneficial than what you might have eaten instead. If you were to eat a chicken wing or something, you're way better off with soy.
With the soy product.
Yeah, isn't that surprising?
It's good information, and it's nice that the research was uniform, as you said, that it's hard to argue with.
Yeah, we have a good meta-analysis going back to 2004. Was the first one, at least that I remember seeing, from they took about 8 studies and combined them. But then about a decade after that, we have just dozens of studies. And now the literature is quite convincing. But we have a problem that you and I both deal with, and all the viewers deal with too, which is the internet is filled with all kinds of noise out there.
Yes, it is.
When you look at the scientific studies, they're pretty clear.
That's great. And that's what we want. I think that's what will drive us forward. I'm curious just what your opinion is on the popularization of fake meat products in various fast food chains. It's becoming a bit of a trend. And if you think this is a good thing for people trying stuff like the Impossible Burger, I know in the vegan community, my brother was telling me this, there's some disrest or some struggle where people think maybe this isn't a good thing because it's not a true representation of the vegan diet. If people think they can go eat an Impossible Burger with cheese and it's somehow, healthy. I think Subway has a meatless meatball sub now. Just curious what your thoughts are on these products becoming more available in the marketplace and in a fast food presentation.
They are methadone.
That's a great analogy.
What I mean is, if you are hooked on meat and a Whopper is your idea of heaven, then going and having the Impossible Whopper, that's your methadone. But it will help you to see that you can actually have a life without beef. But it is a transition to hopefully not having that either. And the reason I say that is the good thing about something like the Impossible Burger is it doesn't have any cholesterol in it. It doesn't have any estrogens in it. But, to make it taste like a meat burger, they have to pump it full of a vegan source of saturated fat, just like the saturated fat that came out of a cow. So its effect on your cholesterol is not going to be dramatically better than the meat burger. But, it's marginally better in some ways. It's less likely to cause colorectal cancer, probably. And of course, there are many veggie burgers that are much lower in fat than an Impossible Burger, and that frankly would be good choices all the time. But the Impossible Burger is designed specifically not for vegans. It's designed for meat eaters, so that they can see, okay, this is all right. And then hopefully they'll, from there, test out other kinds of foods.
I like the methadone analogy. I think that's a good one.
Yeah.
And then I mentioned this to you before we started recording that I work frequently with sober women, and my audience is comprised of many women who have been sober for a while. And I know a lot of times after the early phases of recovery, when people become more stable with, okay, I'm not drinking, I have a new lifestyle, dietary changes come into play. And, women and all of us, really men as well, want to start making new changes. And as you touched on before, it's hard to know because there's so much information. And I like the plan that you laid out, but I'm curious what you would advise for anyone who's in this transitional period of no longer using alcohol, but wants to make dietary changes, but doing too much too fast is, can be detrimental and maybe spin back to wanting the alcohol use again. If you have any thoughts on that.
I don't mean to speak for anybody or to put my values on them. I think people find their own path, but just maybe an observation to offer. And that's that for many people, if alcohol is destroying your life, let's deal with that. And when you're at a place where you want to rethink what you're eating, let's deal with that. Everyone does it in their own way. And if a person makes any change, that's a good thing. At some point, it's nice to jump in the deep end with the way that the two-step method that I mentioned earlier. And I'd encourage everybody to do that at some point. And you will suddenly start making an analogy in your own mind. You'll say, this is just like when I had to break up with whatever that other substance was. And you're gonna look at your partner's friends and you're gonna say, I think cheese is addicting. And it is. And to your surprise, cheese actually does have narcotics in it. They're called casomorphins. They come from the casein protein, the dairy protein. They're not as strong as morphine, but the strongest is called morphoceptin. It's in milk, but especially concentrated in cheese, and it goes to the brain and attaches to the very same receptor that heroin attaches to.
That's
which is why people have this love affair with cheese that they can't break up with. The other thing, though, is I encourage people to do a low-fat vegan diet wherever they are. And one advantage of that is, let's say, and I'm not speaking for anybody else, but let's say for me, I broke up with cigarettes, narcotics, pills, alcohol, whatever the hell the devil is. And I'm not using that anymore, but I find myself substituting overeating. I think, oh, damn it, now I'm gaining weight, and what the hell, I mean, but I kind of need this now, or now I feel like I'm sugar addicted. What am I going to do? When a person decides, I'm going to have vegetables and fruits and whole grains and beans and all the stuff that they produce. Now, everything you're eating has fiber in it, and fiber doesn't have any calories. So you fill up on these foods and you're not hungry anymore, but it's a great way to prevent weight gain. And one last thought, if you don't mind.
Sure.
In one of our diabetes studies that we did here, many of our participants started talking about foods in really kind of addictive terms, like life is not worth living without, you name it. Cheese was the biggest one. So I stuck a needle in everybody's arm, and I sent blood samples to our colleagues at Stanford, and we blood typed everybody. We genotyped everybody. What I was looking for was a gene that causes the brain to have too few dopamine receptors. And as you know, every drug of abuse stimulates dopamine, the pleasure chemical. If it didn't, you wouldn't use it. And that's true for everything, from caffeine to cigarettes to heroin, and everything in between. They stimulate dopamine. What I found is that about half of our research participants with type 2 diabetes, about half of people with type 2 diabetes, have a gene that causes them to have too few dopamine receptors. So the brain releases a little dopamine, and before it finds a receptor to attach to and to stimulate a feel-good response, the dopamine evaporates, it's gone. So they're having to stimulate it more and more and more. And so that leads them to drug abuse, to gambling, to compulsive overeating, to any way to drive dopamine. You're not aware that you're doing this, but you feel that compulsion. So the gene's not going away. What it means is that I'm kind of set up for things that are going to hurt me. And if that's the case, if I've made a rule that everything I'm going to eat is vegan, then what I discover is that these are foods that even if I overdo it, they just don't have that addictive potential, and they're not going to hurt me if I overeat a little bit. And it doesn't mean they're going to be unpleasant foods. They're great. You know, instead of the cheesy, meaty taco, I'll have the bean burrito with jalapenos and a spicy sauce. And, you know, I can have Chinese food. It's not going to be the fried chicken wings, but it'll be the rice dishes and vegetable dishes and tofu dishes and whatever. And I discovered that these foods give me a little bit of protection. They're less likely to cause weight gain. They're more likely to even cause weight loss and make my health problems get better. So what I meant to really say is that some people are kind of a little extra vulnerable, and that these foods really are the ones that love you back.
That's wonderful. I'm curious too if there's a way to front load that. If we know people have this gene, if there's a way to stimulate more dopamine production through things like exercise or, you know, other activities that are going to naturally stimulate dopamine. If we could approach it that way as well, along with the good supportive high fibrous foods.
You know, at McGill University, people bring people in, and there are certain techniques of brain scanning where you could see dopamine activity. And when you get people talking, they get a little bit of dopamine activity. When they talk about themselves, they get some dopamine activity. When they exercise, they do this. So let's say I'm in an AA meeting. What am I doing? I'm with other people. That causes a little dopamine squirt in my brain. And I'm talking about my experience. And this is not just chit chat. This is actually changing brain chemistry in a second by second way, so that when you leave that meeting, you're in a better position than you were if you were sitting at home alone. The things that you mentioned, lacing up your sneakers and getting out in the air, get sunlight on you. Go with somebody else. Today, I guess you got to be 6 feet apart. I don't know, but go out there and get your heart beating a little bit. There's a natural antidepressant in physical exercise. Talk with other people, even if it's online or on your phone. Talk with other people. Hook up with people in whatever way you can. Those things will give you dopamine in a good, natural way.
That's wonderful. And we have those so readily available to us. I think it's really important to remember that and to continue to stress that we do have power to control these things that aren't detrimental to us.
Yeah, in our research meetings here, we go around the room and everybody talks about what they're doing. And some people complain. They'll say, oh, this is just idle chit chat. Why are we doing this? And I have to say, well, this is really for two reasons. The first reason is I want everybody to have a chance to identify their stumbling block. Something's getting in your way. The reason I couldn't stay on the straight and narrow is because I was traveling. Or I'm at a wedding and I know there's going to be all kinds of food and there's going to be toasts and everything. So what am I going to do? I want the group to then talk together and solve those problems. And by talking together as a group, we not only solve the problems that we are facing individually, but we have this natural communal experience, which, whether we like it or not, this great ape we call the human being actually needs the presence of other people in our lives to feel that presence, whether it's virtual or in person. You need that in order to feel psychologically stable to a degree. Now, people can be irritating. There are times when you need your personal space. We are certainly an imperfect species. However, that connection is part of our mental stability too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a great place to close, because I think that's very important for everyone to remember in this time when we are a bit more socially isolated and some of us are quarantining, that we have this wonderful World Wide Web and we can continue to connect with people, even if it is at a 6-foot distance or, from across the country. Right. So I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience, or any projects that you'd like to let people know you have going on or are currently available?
Let me show you this book, if you don't mind.
Please do.
Just came out. Sorry. It's called Your Body in Balance. And this is about what we were talking about, whether it's menstrual cramps or endometriosis or PCOS or infertility or hormone-related cancers. We also talk about thyroid disease and diabetes, and it talks all about food. And I'm hoping that people will have a look and share it with somebody who's struggling a little bit with these things, because people know that food causes health issues. What they didn't know is that quite often, if you choose the right foods, your hormones can get back in balance, whether it's estrogen and testosterone or thyroid hormone or insulin. And when you control your hormones, you've got real power. So
absolutely.
Have at it.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you.